Thank you very much, Winston. That was a wonderful introduction. You'll notice, everybody, that I'll cover a couple of the points that Winston's already talked about, but we'll develop them a little bit, obviously. So wonderful to be with you. Well, sorry that I'm still not there. It's been a couple of years now since I've been in Singapore, and I'm not sure at this rate that 2022 looks particularly promising, but we never know. This is a title that I've been given by Digital Workforce Trends, but I do think it's an amazingly good title. I've had lots of fun preparing for this session, and I suppose doing some rethinking of my own about why, because I agree, I do agree with your introduction, Winston, that the future of work, I think, is different to what it was 2 years ago. I've been asked to share some observations, predictions and opinions. So this clearly isn't going to be research-based, but then we can't really have that much research around things that haven't happened yet. But everything is changing so quickly and so extensively. Clearly, this is only my thoughts, my predictions, with hopefully a relatively wise hat on my wise head on my shoulders. As Winston was saying, I provide consulting and training through a strategic HR academy. I do have a background as an HR director. I'm an author, love speaking at conferences, so wonderful to have this opportunity to talk with you today. So absolutely, haven't things changed so much and so quickly? I'm not even within organizations, but even from my perspective on the periphery, things have clearly been changing so fast. It really has felt like navigating through hyperdrive or going at warp speed on occasion. But I do think there's an interesting paradox about the experience that we've been having, which is that although everything has changed, in a sense, nothing has. We're still sort of operating in the same way that we were doing, but obviously we're doing a lot of that remotely. But I do think there is this important point that we may be distributed geographically. We're not all in the office, we're in different homes and so on. But that's not the same as being organizationally distributed. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit more in a few minutes' time, but I do think there are opportunities and potentially requirements in today's businesses to sort of move away from this traditional, vertical, functional, hierarchical type of business to give people more opportunities to contribute. And I don't think we've managed to do that. And I think that's perhaps a shame, although very understandable. But I think it does need to be part of the future of work as we move forward from this point. Clearly, one of the things that we have done is adopted all of these wonderful technologies, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and so on. And isn't it so fortuitous that the pandemic didn't take place sort of 5 years earlier than it did before these technologies were as mature as they are perhaps today. But that's not digital transformation. You'll remember, before the pandemic, absolutely, we were talking about the future of work. We were talking about the fourth industrial revolution. We were talking about digital transformation. And a big part of that for many organizations was getting people to adopt Microsoft Teams. But digital transformation is much, much, much more than that. And all of these other things that we were trying to do before, I think, still remain. Even things like Zoom and Teams, in a very real sense, we're still not doing properly for a sort of remote hybrid environment. We spend far too much time on these tools communicating synchronously, whereas really they're designed to support asynchronous communication. And I think we still need to make all of these things work. So in a sense, the old future of work hasn't gone away, And actually, there's still quite a lot to do to make it work. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about today, because I do think there are new aspects which are perhaps even more challenging and probably more interesting for us to talk about as well. So that those are the things I'm going to be talking about. Absolutely, well, Winston. So yes, so I was given the title, the need to rethink the future of work, and asked to respond to that in my own way. I wasn't directed what that shift was. So the fact that I've come up with people-centricity as the basis for the new future of work, echoing Winston's comments earlier about putting more human into HR, I think perhaps just sort of reinforces that hopefully we're both thinking in the right direction. But again, as I was saying before, this isn't, in a sense, this isn't new either, is it? We were talking about becoming more people-centric beyond the pandemic. It's not a completely new agenda, but again, it's that hyperdrive acceleration several years into the future. With that experience, however, I think we're able to see that perhaps the way we were thinking about this prior to the pandemic actually wasn't quite as well developed as perhaps it needs to be now at this point. So the blue value chain here is the way that I've been trying to get organizations to think about strategic HR for the last couple of decades. I think we focus far too much on the sort of the individual practices and activities we're undertaking, and not enough about connecting that to the business results that we need to support and enable. But with this focus on organizational outcomes between those two things. So the outcomes are about the qualities, the attributes that we want to create in our people and organization. So we undertake the practices to create the outcomes to lead to the business impacts. And that's not really well, I mean, it is part of the future of work because it's not gone away. We still need to do that. It's just that now we've got much more as well. And I think the way that we tried to add that additional capacity sort of over the last 5 years or so has been mainly through this focus on employee experience and seeing our people as internal customers who we need to satisfy in order that they delight our real end external customers. And I mean, that's great. I'm absolutely not saying, everything that we have done about employee experience has been relevant and useful, and we need to continue doing it. And there are absolutely links, well, all over the place in this diagram, from employee experience to engagement, but directly from employee experience to customer experience as well. So it's not that this is an incorrect way to think about people centricity. It's perhaps necessary but not sufficient. There's more useful ways that we can think about this type of connection as well. Because yes, experience is important, but it's not the most important thing. Winston was talking about the Great Resignation, or whatever we want to call it, and that's certainly the case in the US. Where I am in the UK, I think we don't see it quite to the same extent. But what we are seeing is people wanting to talk about their employment with their employers and trying to seek and build a new employment deal. And that, to me, is the key thing. And those conversations aren't about give me a better experience, because most people don't come to work for a good experience of work. They come to work to achieve something meaningful for them. A lot of people in the UK are talking about the Microsoft research suggesting that lots of people would be, I don't know what the percentage is, lots of people would be prepared to give up some of their reward in order to have more flexibility. And I don't think this has been researched, but my bet is that a lot of people would give up some of that flexibility to achieve something worthwhile in their jobs. So, to have more autonomy, to be able to progress and develop and grow within their jobs, to have a real sense of meaning that they're spending their lives achieving something worthwhile. Those are the things that really motivate people within their jobs. But the issue about all of those things is that they are often very personal. They depend on the individual. So it's hard to get at these things. And I think in today's environment, we need to do so because they're now so important that, can we really ignore them any longer? So, people-centricity, we've seen that acceleration, but there does need to be a shift as well, because I think the way that we've grown people-centricity during the pandemic is that we've become more people-centric in a transactional type of way, to respond to people to stay in business, whereas now we need to grab hold of that agenda and use it to drive our businesses forward strategically as well. And I don't think the previous slide was quite enough. So this is the way that I think we need to think about people-centricity. Thinking about this sort of dual, multi-sided value chain. So the bottom line here, using HR practices to drive organizational outcomes to achieve business impacts, that's basically the slide that I showed you previously. But instead of thinking about employees as internal customers, I think we need to think about employees as real external customers. So actually the top line here is a superimposed but separate value chain. And what that's about is using the same HR practices, but now sort of focusing in two different ways towards the business and towards our employees as customers as well. Not just to provide a good experience, but to meet their needs, their personal needs, not about why they work. Well, it is about why they work for the business, but it's not necessarily about what the business is trying to do. For me personally, my key motivation is to understand the way things work, which is sort of why I always use so many models like this in presentations that I do. So if I was employed by an organization, they'd want to try to motivate me by giving me opportunities to understand better the things that organization was doing to make things better. We need to find ways to help people meet their needs, because that's the basis for their well-being and fulfillment, not just employee experience. Now, there is a business benefit of that. The more well-being and fulfillment we get, the better the business benefits as well. But it's now an indirect link. And I think we have to be really careful to try to sort of formalize that too much and calculate return on investment of it and so on. Because as soon as we try to calculate an ROI, we're now looking at that top level value chain from a business perspective. The whole point of that top level is to start thinking about our businesses from a more human, people-centric type of agenda. So the big shift actually, in terms of rethinking the future of work, my suggestion is let's think about the future of people in work, because that's going to give us a whole new set of opportunities and really take our organizations forward. So this is about philosophy, not about process. But changing the philosophy, changing the ideology about the way we run our organizations. As soon as you change that, everything else changes too. So I just want to give you a couple of quick examples, and perhaps just starting with the way we organize people and work. Now, I'm not going to spend long on this slide because I did a session with Digital Workforce Trends for Hong Kong earlier this year, and I went quite deeply into this model. So if you're interested in this, there is a YouTube video. The link is at the bottom of this slide. Please take the time to watch that for yourself. The only thing I did want to say very quickly is, well, firstly, there are different ways to organize. We don't just need that sort of functional hierarchical type of groups that I was talking about before. Secondly, this is important for sort of business objectives as well as the more people-centric approach that I'm talking about today. But it is important for people centricity. So the bottom line of this model is all about taking the work that the organization needs to do and bringing people to do the work. So it's primarily about the work itself. I think as we shift into this more people-centric perspective, the top line here is about bringing people together into communities and networks around things that they're passionate about and enabling them to find work that would be useful for the organization. So both top and bottom of this model are about people and work, but the bottom was about the work done by people. The top is about the people doing work. And I think that makes a big difference to the way that working in these organizations feel. So, I encourage you to think about bringing in communities and networks to give your people more of a compelling role inside your organizations. And then the second thing I just wanted to share was just having a very brief look at what this might mean for HR practices. And I thought perhaps one interesting example might be for retention. So I've sort of tried to show a progression here from sort of old traditional HR or personnel, albeit that actually that's still very much in existence today, sort of through to the future work prior to the pandemic and sort of where we may be going today. So in the past, well, today, actually, in most organizations, if we think we have a retention risk of somebody who we think is talented and we'd like to keep in the organization, the tendency is on this graph, value and time is to try to extend the time, try to keep them those extra couple of months. This will be something that many of you are thinking about trying to do and giving people retention bonuses and so on to fight off the great resignation. But the difference you actually make to that total level of value is fairly minimal, actually. So what I've been arguing for some time, particularly connected to the previous future of work and digital transformation and so on, is that we take a more strategic perspective that's more focused on sort of doing things in a smarter way. So perhaps, and this is the central graph here, perhaps looking at developing a sort of longer-term partnership that spans over a number of different employment contracts so that we can actually be more focused on the individual and sort of talk to them about the opportunities they can get internally. But if we think that they could develop better elsewhere, then directing them to that as well. And hoping and trusting that sort of that by being more on their agenda, that actually encourages them to return to our organization later on. So, if you've got these three bars, three different periods of employment, the area within those stacks is obviously much, much greater than simply trying to increase the time that people stay in that first graph in a more traditional way. So, that's not something that many organizations do, but some leading organizations do. But even that today, I don't think is enough. Because although we're trying to sort of get closer to our people and do the right thing for our people, the fundamental basis of doing this is about benefits for the business. We're still doing it for us. Is it going to be valuable for the organization to bring this person back and hang on to them a little bit more? So the graph on the right-hand side of the slide is my thinking about what we might need to do now if we're going to be truly people-centric in the Great Resignation. And that's to let our people go, you know, to be truly on their agenda and to try to help them do whatever's going to be the best thing for them. And, you know, if we have a conversation with them and, you know, they think they're going to get better development, better progression, better pay elsewhere, great. So we say, wonderful, we hope that works out, you know, let's stay in touch if you'd like to do so. You know, if you'd like to, you know, tell other people about the experience you've had here, if there's any feedback to us that can make us do better, you know, let's have that conversation, but let's let the people go, with the expectation that now you've got that third axis that I've labeled employee magnetism, because I just couldn't think of a better sort of more well, more human, more useful term. But, you know, creating that pull, that branding, that means a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals are going to work for us because they understand that we're acting in a human way, that we've got their back, that we're, you know, we're thinking about supporting them rather than simply treating them as somebody who's in the organization to do work. Yeah, it's a very different way of thinking about HR, but I really do think that's where we've got to go. This is about paradox. You know, we've really, when we were thinking about treating employees as internal customers, satisfying external customers, we've got to think about those two different stakeholder groups, but it's not really a paradoxical relationship. You know, you can do one in order to achieve the other. We've now got to start thinking much more deeply and smartly about how do we revise and rethink everything that we do in HR, our organizations and our businesses to satisfy both of these different groups, our customers and our employees. And I think everything that we do, you know, the way we organize, the physical workplaces that we have, the digital technologies we use, all of those things change. I mean, the hybrid working, you know, absolutely is a big issue. How do we get round what is the best way to allow people to work at home and get them together in the office at this, yeah, within the same role? But it's a small paradox. You know, the bigger one, the fundamental one, is how do we be customer and employee centric at the same time? And I think once we figured that out, smaller paradoxes like how do we do hybrid working, I think will tend to sort themselves out. So there you go. Those were my thoughts. And hopefully that last slide about paradox as well sort of opens up into perhaps a useful conversation within the panel. But if anybody does want any more information, you know, please do get in touch. It'd be lovely to talk to you. And you know, it's just going to be such an exciting time in HR. Yeah, let's just hold on to our hats and move it forward. But thank you.